welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen. And today I am joined by a repeat guest who was here 2 years ago to talk about an absolutely lovely mystery set in the dance world. And this year we are back to talk about a thrilling psychological thriller. It has kept me awake at nights. It's been so much fun to read, and I am so excited to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm Lucy Ashe, and my novel, The Model Patient, is a psychological novel about a fashion model turned housewife in 1960s London who develops a dangerous obsession with her psychotherapist. Even in Westbrook, she goes to see a therapist for help with recurring nightmares and her fears about trying for a baby, and she gave up her career as a model when she got married, and her husband wants her to stop taking the contraceptive pill. So she goes to this therapy, but this relationship with her therapist quickly begins to intensify, and he uses her transference, the way a patient projects patterns of behavior and emotions from their past onto the therapist, as a tool to draw her deeper and deeper into her obsession, and she starts to lose her grip on reality and what is real and what is a delusion, and it really spirals from there.
It's such a good book, and I'm having such a good time reading it. So for our new listeners, because it was about 2 years ago that you were here talking about the Sleeping Beauties, could you remind us a little bit about your journey as a writer and perhaps some of those other works?
Yeah, so my first novel was called The Dance of the Dolls, and that was published in 2023. And it was a historical mystery set in the world of dance. It was set in 1930s London, it was two identical twin ballerinas putting on a production Capella at Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. And there are these two men, a piano player and a point shoemaker, who become obsessed with them. So that was my first novel. It was very dance rooted. I used to be a dancer. I trained at the Royal Ballet School. So this was a wonderful way of coming back to the world of dance through my writing. And then my second book, The Sleeping Beauties, was published a year later, and that was also really immersed in the world of dance. The Sleeping Beauties, it's about these two women who meet on a train at the very end of the Second World War, when one woman is returning some evacuees to London, and their lives quickly become really sort of dangerously entangled. And one of them is a ballet dancer, and she has been touring with the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company during the Second World War. And that novel is a mystery. It's got lots of kind of twists and turns, but it's very kind of deeply rooted in real historical events and productions that happened during the Second World War. So I absolutely loved that opportunity to research where did the arts go in times of conflict. And then The Model Patient is a real change for me. It's my first novel that isn't about the world of dance. It's a departure from that. It's rooted in the world of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, so it required a huge shift in focus and research. So it took a long time to get this book right because of all of the research that I needed to do for it.
I'd love to know about what that research process was like for you. Did you immerse yourself in books, in historical documents, in movies, novels from the period? How did you take yourself back to 1960s London?
Such a range. I think that's the joy of writing books set in particular time periods. And because it's fiction, you're not, I guess, sort of having to sort of limit yourself to very specific sources. You can really use so many different things. So I did look at quite a lot of women's magazines from the time, actually, some Woman's Own, Honey, different things about fashion, advertisements. Evelyn Westbrook, my main character, she was a model, so she loves fashion. She's very kind of up to date with the fashion. So I wanted to make sure I knew all about the changes in fashion at that time. I read Mary Quant's memoir, her autobiography, which was really interesting for that time, to think about how how clothing was changing and how that reflected some of the changes for women's lives at the time. But the biggest research was about psychotherapy, and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not claiming to be an expert on this at all. But the novel is very much written from the perspective of a patient rather than a therapist, and about the experience of a patient when they're going through this really intense form of therapy called psychodynamic therapy, which at this time, and in fact often still today, the work is very much about the relationship, or the transferences, the projections that come up in the therapy relationship between the patient and the therapist. So I wanted to think about how that had started. I went back to sort of Freud, some Jung, like all these different therapists and psychologists, and what that specific relationship looked like. But I found myself getting quite frustrated because I was reading all of these accounts of therapy from the perspective of these experts, obviously these therapists. But I was like, they don't seem to have any awareness of, or any kind of discussion of what it is like for the patient to be in this kind of work. And I was going through, the idea for the book came from my own experience in therapy. That really sparked why I felt like I needed to write this book. Because of my own very complicated relationship with my therapist. So I was getting more and more frustrated. I was like, why don't they seem to understand how painful this can be for a patient when they're projecting all of these things from their past onto the therapist, but there's no kind of explanation of it, or no support given by the therapist. It's sort of just, there it is, and then the therapist is very silent, very withholding. It's very confusing. So I tried to find as many accounts from patients that I could. There were some books that had been written. There were some articles that I found. But I also had my own experience, which I think gave some authenticity to these very fraught therapy sessions that are very tense, often dramatic, that you read about in the book.
That is such an interesting background and fascinating sources that you looked at to look into the world of psychotherapy. And, I'm glad that you talk about Freud too, because I think, gender also plays a huge role in these dynamics. And, Freud, who was famously not normal about women, really was not attentive to how his work affected his patients. And so to see something that is so thoroughly grounded in the perspective of the patient here is really interesting, and sometimes claustrophobic, the way that a therapy room can be, but in a totally immersive, like I can't put this book down way.
I thank you. That's great to hear. I don't think I could have written this book unless I had been through this experience, because I could not possibly have imagined the type of conversations that you have with this kind of therapist. It's completely one-sided, and that is the point of it. I'm pouring out my heart, my emotions, and then the therapist obviously is giving you nothing. And this silence, often really long silences, especially when you've just shared something from your past that you've never said out loud before, and then they're just silent. It's terrifying, and it brings up a lot of feelings of kind of anger, rage at times, confusion, and also a lot of doubt. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to really immerse this book in how frightening it can be to be so full of doubt and uncertainty about whether you're getting things right, or are you too much? Are you getting therapy wrong? And of course, a good therapy, which I think like mine turned into pretty good therapy, to be honest, after a while, is actually about learning to sit with uncertainty. But there's a really fine line between sitting with uncertainty and starting to feel like you're going mad because you just can't trust your instincts anymore. And that's where Evelyn Westbrook is with this. She doesn't know whether she's the problem or whether her therapist is manipulating her in some way. And I hope and I believe that the reader does get kind of swept along with those questions. For a while, they're like, Evelyn is clearly mad. She is deluded, like he's doing nothing wrong. But then you start to be like, okay, actually, the way he's talking to her, the kinds of questions, the way he brings it back to himself and how she wants him to think about her is manipulative and is very deliberate. And so we kind of get swept along with her kind of wild emotional journey.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk more about Evelyn and how you shape her as a character, how she's shaped in particular by her times. I'm curious about how women's magazines sort of uh, contributed to that, not only for the fashion, which does play a sort of big role here too, but I imagine that women's magazines from them give you a really good lens onto the different types of social pressures and pressures within the home that women faced at the time. Was that something that you were thinking about too?
Yeah, a huge amount. And that's one of the reasons why I set the novel in 1963, because I felt that it was such a transitional time for women. It was, you're moving towards the swinging 60s of London, where you have like sexual liberation, a lot more freedoms for women. But 1963, you're not quite there yet. It's still very much rooted in the conservatism and the post-war austerity, actually, of the 50s. And Evelyn is kind of stuck in this place where she wants a different life, but she's also like very much a part of the patriarchy. And I think so many women might try at this time to be like finding something new, but actually when you are rooted in a patriarchal world that you've grown up in, it's actually very hard to fight that and to change that. So and also because she's this fashion model, she's lived this really interesting existence where if you look at advertisements, most catalog advertisements, it's presenting from the 1960s, it's presenting women as housewives most of the time, and it's very conservative. It's not really until the mid 60s that you have like a different look for the models, and you have Twiggy coming, and that's from Jean Shrimpton. But when Evelyn was modeling in like the late 50s, she's presenting a very conservative image in the modeling photos, but her life wasn't really like that. And also the way that she was treated by men wasn't really like that. So she's always stuck in these different tensions. There's a moment in the book where she's thinking about her mother and the mixed messages her mother would give her. So her mother would try and help her before a party when she was a teenager to get dressed up, and she'd be like, you should wear this because this is what boys like you to wear, this is what you'll look most attractive wearing. But then her mother would get really disappointed in her if she actually got too close to a boy or was like too kind of loose, as it were. So she said, what am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be attractive, but no one's supposed to touch me? And that, I think for Evelyn, she's just so full of these mixed messages all of the time. And that is played out again and again in her therapy sessions as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's really interesting framing to me that society was in this transition between different social arrangements, different values, different norms. And Evelyn, as part of this shift, when you have to sort of, when you're leaving one way of thinking or one worldview and sort of being kicked and screaming into another, that creates really vulnerable and almost dangerous conditions, I think, for Evelyn to encounter Dr. Daly when she does, right? Because I think like that doubt can transfer into gaslighting, whether that's self-gaslighting or being gaslit by somebody else so easily, right? Because you're disoriented in terms of your worldview and your values. And am I saying something real?
Yeah, no, this is so, yeah, it's wonderful to hear you talk about it this way. Yeah, completely. And I think that she's very vulnerable at the point that she goes into therapy, and particularly because of this big question, which is one of the reasons she goes about, is whether her and her husband Henry are going to start trying for a baby. And she is stuck because she doesn't want this yet. Maybe she will one day, but at this point in her life, she's 27. She doesn't want it. And she's also been taking the contraceptive pill, which was newly available on the National Health Service in the UK at that time. She'd been taking it like ever since it was available in 1961, the book said in 1963. And the thought of it being taken away from her is really frightening for her. But she also doesn't know whether she's making too much of a fuss, or like she should be trying to do this for Henry. And one of the reasons she says to herself that she's going to therapy is like, I want to give Henry what he wants. I want to be a better wife. I want to be the model wife. I don't want to be stuck in this place of being so full of conflict. So she is kind of, as you say, gaslighting herself, because she's trying to force herself into a direction that she doesn't really want. Like there's a part of her that's kind of kicking and screaming in the other direction. And Dr. Daly represents for her all of these patriarchal structures that she's lived with her whole life. And I think one of the flaws of the way in which he interacts with her is he doesn't recognize that, or if he does recognize that, he abuses it. He manipulates it to sort of make her even more dependent on her need for him. He takes advantage of it, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. And, because, in order for therapy to work, you are told that you need to become vulnerable, do things that feel scary or say things that feel scary. And I think that it could become really hard then when you are in a space where it becomes normal to feel vulnerable or unsafe. How do you judge actual lack of safety in those circumstances, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I think I was going through myself at the same time as writing this book, is like, I don't know to what extent I can feel safe in my own therapy relationship. I didn't know how much to trust him. And I think it was creating so much doubt in myself. I was like, am I just projecting onto him here? Like, am I getting this really wrong? And actually I should be trusting him and he's not doing anything wrong at all. Or am I missing, or am I not listening to the red flags that are coming up? I guess the experiences that I had in my past, just like Evelyn, I brought to therapy, and I felt that my therapist wasn't making an effort to show an awareness of that, about how the way I'd experienced things with men in the past might be interacting the way I was with him. But of course, that creates, therefore, a really difficult power dynamic that it's up to the therapist to address and to bring into the open, and not kind of say, this is you projecting, this is your past playing out with me. And it might be, but then how can you find a way to be like, okay, well, this relationship is different. How can you show that this therapy relationship is going to be a different one? With Evelyn, it doesn't, well, I don't want to give spoilers away, but finding that safety in the relationship is pretty impossible for her. She can't do it. Whereas in my therapy relationship, I very much did find safety in it, but it took, I would say, about 2 years, which is quite a long time to be going back and forth. I think a therapy relationship is fascinating because part of the work of it is about kind of ruptures followed by repairs. You have a rupture in the relationship, which is usually caused by you kind of reacting to something that they have said or not said, or feeling very vulnerable about something that you have just shared, and then maybe getting a response to that feels unsettling. And then the next session it might be several sessions of kind of this disruption, this conflict, and then you find a way through and repair it, and then that feels really important because it's a sort of a mirror of the way in which you might be looking at the world around you. So to get to that stage in a therapy relationship is amazing, but it can take a really long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a lot of time to invest, and especially it's a lot of time, and it's preceded by an extremely fast forming intimacy, right? You are telling the person so much about yourself up front, and it still takes so much time after that, which is of course part of the process, and it sort of it has to be that way. But it is very scary, and I'd love to know, depicting the therapy sessions, especially with Dr. Daly, and wanting to cultivate, ambiguity as to his intentions, what his views are or his thoughts are in a moment, what he's trying to get from Evelyn. What was writing those scenes like, and what guided you? How do you keep him ambiguous,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it was really challenging to do, but in some ways, I loved that aspect of it because I was giving myself the permission to, as the author who was supposed to know everything, to kind of not know. I was putting myself in the same position as Evelyn, who the novel is very much through her perspective, where she goes into these sessions and she doesn't know what he's thinking. She doesn't know the intention behind what he's saying, or whether, what does it all mean, and we don't know. For a long time in the book, we don't know anything. The reader doesn't know anything about that either, because I wanted, as I was writing those scenes, to keep that ambiguity and to keep that tension. So, for example, he one of the first things that he says to her, I think it's about 4 sessions in, that really starts to trigger this transference, where she's like projecting onto him a lot of past feelings, is she's talking about how she really struggles to know what to say to people, because she doesn't know how to, well, she wants to really make sure she presents herself well, that she makes herself kind of attractive, like that she's saying the right thing, people will approve of her. And he says, perhaps you don't know what to say to me because you don't know what to say to make me like you. And then she's like, oh, wow, maybe I don't know whether he likes me. I need him to like me? And it sort of spirals. And there are all sorts of things that he says that you could interpret as just a perfectly ordinary thing to say as a therapist. Or you could be like, actually, that feels quite manipulative. And he's not really taking any awareness of the power dynamic between them. So as I was writing it, I guess I was also drawing on my own experiences in therapy, where I would sit after a session for hours with my mind just turning over and over and over, being like, what did that mean? Why did he say that? Why was he silent at that point? And I didn't know any of the answers, And it's accepting that you can't know inside the mind of someone else is part of the work of therapy. But it's a really difficult thing to do, especially when, as you say, you are being really vulnerable. You are opening up things you've never said before to someone. For them to be like completely silent, or to not really give you any feedback, I suppose, on what you have just said, is really terrifying. So I think the reader probably feels that as they're reading it, this kind of frustration, like what is happening? Like why is he saying these things or not saying these things? And why don't we know what he's thinking and feeling? Because that's how frustrated I felt about it at the same time.
Yeah, oh, that is so interesting. Yeah, and when you combine that with the sort of like internalized tendency Evelyn already has to doubt herself, it becomes extraordinarily easy to sort of find yourself ping-ponging between two entirely different interpretations of what somebody has said. So,
Yeah, and I think that's this idea of like splitting is something that's quite interesting that she does, is where she can go from like actually thinking of him as this sort of benevolent, warm, like paternal figure that she wants to care for her, to actually like really hating him and thinking he's like manipulative and evil and trying and out to get her. And she can flip between the two really quickly. And that's, I think, a really interesting psychological concept, that, that inability to hold a sort of more complex version of someone in mind, or to be able to hold both of those things in mind and not need it to be completely one way or the other. And it's not really until quite a lot further into the novel that she starts to be able to do that, to hold a more complex image of someone. They're not either kind of out to get her or in love with her.
yes, yeah, because both of those, either the hero worship or the splitting and the disdain, they both fuel obsession, right? Because both positive affect and negative affect are both affect. They're very strong links to a person. So regardless of what lens she is viewing him through at any given moment, it's just deepening that sort of that close obsession.
Yeah. I mean, she's completely fixated by him, and so much so that she changes the time for some of her appointments. She ends up having some afternoon appointments, and the first time she goes there are other people in the waiting room, and it completely throws her, because she's like, well, obviously, he has other patients, but like obviously he does, but she doesn't want him to. It's almost like she can't. She's become so fixated that she wants to be like the only one, even though she knows that that's mad.
That's so funny. This is like a little irrelevant, but I had a therapist in the city. And after seeing her for many, many, many years, one time I ran into a friend in her waiting room who also had the same therapist, it turned out, after all this time. And I had to reframe of like, oh my gosh, so like you've known who I was talking about this whole time.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think that is such a jarring thing to happen, actually. And it slightly breaks the therapy frame that has been created. This sort of, this, this like, it's like a protective frame in some ways, but it's like this sort of enclosed world that you have with your therapist where you can explore anything, you can say anything, like nothing you bring is too much. And as soon as there's a tiny break in it, even if it's not harmfully meant or nothing has gone wrong, it does take, as you say, that kind of bit of a recalibration of like, oh, okay, actually the real world does exist outside of this relationship, which is a strange thing to get your head around.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does break that sort of, the compartmentalization that allows you to, close the door on your therapy session and walk away back into everyday life, not thinking about what happened in there. It's like, oh, this is actually another tie to my real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this has been so, so interesting, and it's such a lovely book. I can't wait to recommend to people here. What are you working on now? Are you writing at the moment?
Yeah, so well, I've actually just finished the edits on my next one, which will be out next year. It's called The Love Cure, and I guess it has some similar themes. It's set in 1970s New York, so a bit closer to home, and it's about a sort of sex therapy cult that I guess used the kind of countercultural ideals and values from that time as their sort of facade for actually kind of methods of control underneath it. But it's actually based on a real therapy cult from the time, but completely fictionalized. So that has been really fun to research.
That sounds fascinating. And it sounds like a very interesting progression of what you're working on here, seeing how, 10 years on, how how else is control being wielded in these places. Very interesting.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks. And thank you, listeners. By the time that you hear this, The Model Patient will be out and available. So please head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for your books. All right, we'll see you next time, everybody. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.